Who's here?
Anthony.
Oh, well, Anthony, let's bring him up.
Hello, how are you? Good afternoon.
3 years in a row.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I skipped the year for county legislature last year.
Well, it's all right. It's good to have you back.
Thank you. It was great seeing you again. And thank you for all the work that y'all do.
Thank you so much. So let's talk about your running for office for Assembly in 140, right?
Absolutely. Yes, under the Green Party. Thank you.
So why don't we do the opening? Why don't you talk to us about why we should elect you to the 140th district, and then we'll ask some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as usual, I fight for the cultivation of cannabis, and I would co-sponsor the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act introduced by Crystal Peoples-Stokes, the majority leader. And I would push for an amendment for 99 plants to be homegrown. This would, in my opinion, stop monopolization like we've seen in the medical industry. And sorry if my daughter interrupts in any way.
That's all right.
And I think that 99 plant home grow would help with the minority community and the frontline communities who have faced arrest through all these years to be included in the industry, where they might not have enough startup capital to get into the industry. I would also co-sponsor the New York Health Act, and that Health Act would allow for everybody to be insured. And I think especially during a pandemic, it's extremely important for everybody to have health insurance for preventative treatments so that they don't end up in the hospital and overburden the health infrastructure. That is Assembly Bill A5248A, and I would most definitely co-sponsor that as soon as I got into office. I would also co-sponsor the New York State Off Act, so that would get New York State off fossil fuels and be 100% sustainable by 2030. I think that this is extremely important because we need better air quality standards in New York, and a big contributor to pollution is actually just transportation. So if we were to get off fossil fuels and convert to 100% clean energy, then we could have a much cleaner air quality, especially from just traffic pollution. So that bill is Assembly Bill 3565, so I would most definitely co-sponsor that. And then another bill that I think is extremely important, especially when we're talking about the funding for the Office of People with Disabilities, is I would definitely co-sponsor the Assembly Bill 7791B.
Right now, 70 people live on the feed. Sorry about that. I was referring to our friends at Channel 4. I forgot to mute myself. Go on.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's Assembly Bill 7791B, and that would repeal the rebates for the stock transfer tax. So I think that we have way too much money that is being rebated to Wall Street, especially during a time where companies like AIG are not necessarily insuring businesses on all of the claims that are being filed due to the COVID pandemic. And I think that it's time for Wall Street to pay their fair share. I think that some of the funding could specifically be earmarked for the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, but also for the campaign for Be Fair to Direct Care, so that we can actually pay a livable wage for those who provide direct services. So those are the bills that I would be focusing on, and I would definitely co-sponsor and push through and ask for committee votes and ask for full floor votes. And I would definitely be lobbying the governor directly to sign and support so that they can move through the legislature.
All right.
Okay. We're ready for some questions. You want to do the first one, Mark?
Sure. Should you be elected, would you be open and willing, or how would you be open and willing would you be, and how would you go about it? Creating positions for individuals with disabilities in your office.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would definitely have one staffer fully present at all office hours to take on any question from members of the community. Um, I think that I would have a working relationship with any group that's working to try to hold the NFTA board accountable so that there's better transportation measures. So that's something that, if possible, I mean, if necessary, I would just take on, myself completely with no staff help, just to coordinate efforts with the NFTA. And this is extremely important because I know it had been brought up in previous times that I've spoken at the Western New York Independent Living Candidate Forum about snow removal at bus stops and intersections. And I actually made the mistake of saying that I don't think it's too much of an issue in Tonawanda. But mistakenly, I was that at the corner of Sheridan and Delaware, there was an issue with snow barriers, and there would be people with walkers and canes walking in the street with, vehicle traffic going at least 40, 45, sometimes 50 miles per hour with snowy conditions. That's a terrible situation. And even on Niagara Falls Boulevard, the snow removal has to be taken care of. I think that I had heard an interesting suggestion from somebody about how we need to have special types of vehicles that do snow removal just for sidewalks, and I've seen some of that downtown Buffalo. So it's possible that some of that could be implemented in other towns where there's a very serious neglect of intersections and walkways being cleared of snow. So, I mean, I would definitely have a staffer full-time for all office hours, specifically for the community with people with disabilities and developmental disabilities.
All right. What would you do to support increase in accessible and affordable housing within our communities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, because housing access is extremely important for any community, especially for people with disabilities and developmental disabilities. So I think that we need to have a model of inclusionary zoning where any new, whether you have a section of housing stock or even just a specific building, there needs to be inclusionary zoning of either 20 or 30% for lower income, senior, and for people with disabilities or developmental disabilities. I think that we need to really focus on taking care of any land that's not being utilized and start building more housing stock. I think that we need to have rent control ordinance measures at the county level so that any type of rent increase will have a certain percentage of that go back into the property so that we don't have as much dilapidating housing. And this might actually allow for more investment in housing to have accessibility for people with developmental disabilities or just disabilities. So I think that Santa Monica, California has a rent control ordinance that I think we should try to implement most of that, and specifically the measure I spoke about in terms of having a certain percentage of the rent increase go back to the property. I think that the inclusionary zoning is important, but also, we need to hold developers more responsible in terms of when any of the local development agencies give out tax incentives. So there should be a stipend or a stipulation, within any of these projects that have tax abatements or tax savings or some type of incentive. I think that there should be a stipulation to include that type of apartment building with availability to people with disabilities or developmental disabilities as well. So thank you. That was a great question, and I wish more people would talk about that issue.
You're welcome.
Next question comes from our chat, talking about funding in COVID. So the way I'm going to phrase this is, you know, the state's stance about the amount of debt the state is in due to COVID expenses. Okay. And that the state in a lot of areas has done what's called a 20% withhold on state funding for activities, including services for people with disabilities. What do you think the state's role should be? My apologies. To get services during COVID to people in the communities?
Well, it should be extremely important. Thank you for that question. And I mean, I did point to the repeal of the state the stock transfer tax to repeal the rebate for that. So I think that that would be a huge funding source in the billions of dollars. I mean, I'd also have been talking about for many years the legalization of cannabis, and I think the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act would bring in $500 million every year in funding. My concerns with the legalization of cannabis is that, you know, it shouldn't be just put in the general fund. I would support any legislation or amending legislation to actually put that funding into the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, or any of the non-for-profit services that provide direct services, or even for the Be Fair to Direct Care campaign. I think that there should be specific legislative intent and specific legislative enumeration within the bill to direct that funding appropriately. I also think that the repeal of to rebate the stock transfer tax, I think there should also be language included specifically to try to help alleviate this discussion of a 20% cut in services, because I don't think that that should happen at all, especially during a pandemic. This is insanity. I do believe that by having the New York Health Act, I think that that would help, and not with the funding per se, but I think that over the long term, it would help with not overburdening the healthcare infrastructure, so that we could have more funding to the direct services for preventative treatment, or for those who are not living in facility, who are independently living, to have more of the funding for those services. So we're not just trying to, you know, catch up with the funding for the healthcare infrastructure for the actual in-hospitalization phase.
Alrighty. Another question from our feed talks about what happens if the current administration, federal administration, continues. As a state legislator, what will you do to fight an administration that blocks state funding?
I would absolutely be writing letters directly to the White House, and, you know, I would include personal stories from people that I've come across when I've done my door-to-door, specifically in my district, Riverside, I've been focusing on this year. And, you know, there are so many issues that that community faces in terms of being a food desert. So any types of cutting and funding for the services that they already rely on, beyond just the actual troubles that they're facing, beyond the fight for those services, I would make sure that the White House gets a letter from me directing them to, you know, discuss with the constituents that I represent the problems they face, especially with any additional cuts from the federal government. And I would absolutely put in that letter that we spend so much on our military in terms of foreign military interventionism, when that needs to be spent at home so that we actually take care of our population. I think that we need a strong national defense. And I know that my family has fought in every major war going back to World War I, besides the Korean conflict. And I think that my family recognizes, anyone who has served in my family has recognized that we need to take care of our people at home, and we need to stop spending so much money on the interests of the few for these foreign military conflicts. I would definitely make sure that that was put into a letter to the White House. In terms of other fights, I would just try to get the legislature to also echo the voices of our constituencies with formal resolutions to Congress, if the Senate continues to not try to focus on funding, and also resolutions to the White House as well. So I think that there are some small ways to echo the voices of the people and magnify the voices of the people.
And I think that that's a good place to end it. I want to thank you for coming. I wish you best of your luck in your candidacy.
Yes.
I know that I would normally ask as a last question, what would you do if you lost? But I know you continue to fight in the community to get people's voices heard. So I have no doubt we'll be seeing you again, one way or the other.
Thank you. I really do appreciate the work that you all do, and I really appreciate your time and for having me come to speak as you always have. I've learned so much.
It is our
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day and stay safe, guys.
You
Bye-bye.
too.